Hello and welcome back to Aerospace Horizons. My name's Evan and today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by a former Blue Angel boss. George Dahm was the commanding officer of the Blue Angels in the 1997 and 1998 show seasons. That was just part of his Navy career, which also included leadership positions in 4 aircraft carrier strike fighter squadrons, air wing commander of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS John F. Kennedy, and he was an instructor pilot at Topgun. Today, Captain Dahm is a business aviation manager, speaker, and consultant to Fortune 500 corporations, private companies, and individuals. And I'm out of breath saying all that. As if that isn't enough, he is now an author. His book, High Trust Leadership, Building High Performance Teams, is out now. George, welcome.
Thank you, Evan. Great to be with you.
Glad to be here.
Exactly.
So we're going to talk a lot about your career in the Navy with the Blues and obviously your book. But I wanted to start off with our shared history here, which is this. So this would have been 1997, your first year on the team.
Yeah.
I would have been 7 years old.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, things have changed a little bit. That was the last time we met. This was in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, which was an air show I went to basically every year they had it. It was a great time, and it was great to meet you. But I wanted to start off talking about your experiences like this, where you find out way later that you had an impact on someone that was, you probably met 1,000 kids this month, and I was just one of them, but now here we are talking.
Yeah.
Have you had other experiences like that, and how does that make you feel when you find something like that?
Yeah, that one of the best parts of the experience was the opportunity to meet young folks and realize that you had the opportunity to make an impression. And of course, that's one of the reasons that the Navy and Marine Corps support the Blue Angels, is the opportunity to inspire young people to consider serving their country. So not unlike our situation when we met at Willow Grove, about, it must have been about 15, 16 years after I left the team, I got an email one day just out of the blue from a gentleman who said, "You're not going to remember this, but in your second year, you flew an air show in Tucson. And after the show, you guys came to the crowd to sign autographs and talk to the public. And you spent about 4 or 5 minutes with my son, who was 6 years old at the time, and talked to him. And I just wanted you to know that next week he's graduating from the Naval Academy and he's going off to flight school. And he says that his interest and that journey all began that day in Tucson." So, wow. Just incredible. So that's a pretty neat part of the experience.
Awesome. So does that happen often, you'd say?
It's hard to know sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't always get the feedback in the letters. You'd like to think that you have the opportunity, and so hopefully we did.
Awesome. Well, it certainly inspired me, clearly. So here we are.
Yeah.
We can dive into your career if you're okay with that.
Of course.
I wanted to. Well, first I wanted to understand where your interest in aviation came from. Were you interested in aviation when you were my age here?
I think all young folks, are fascinated by aviation and flying and so forth. But I wasn't one of these people that, grew up around airplanes. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. Nobody I knew was a pilot or anything. But my father had served in the Navy in World War II, and he was interested in one of his sons having a military experience. And so that's what inspired me to sign up for the Navy ROTC program and go to college. And during that time, and I started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do when I graduate? And of course, in the summertime, the Navy takes you around and you spend 6 weeks on active duty and you get a chance to see what opportunities there are. And one of them was getting a chance to get some flights, and one of them was in the back seat of a TA-4 Skyhawk. And when I had that experience, I said, okay, I think this is what I want to do.
You were hooked.
Yeah.
Awesome. So obviously you have an interest in leadership. You wrote a whole book about it.
Of course.
And I was curious when that interest was sparked. Was this something that you were interested in, like before you joined the Navy or after you joined the Navy, or when did that come about?
Yeah, well, my friends tell me that I grew up with that I've always been an organizer. I've always been somebody who's trying to gather people around to go accomplish something. So I think it started, fairly early. But the interesting thing about the military in general and the Navy in particular is that we don't have any lateral entry, right? So we always have to be preparing and grooming our leadership to replace us. So you're always effectively training your replacements, right? And so throughout my career, I was taking notes along the way. Some of them were things that I wanted to emulate, and some things were people, oh, I don't want to do that when I get the chance. But it's always been something of interest for me, sure.
And what was your first experience with the Blue Angels, like seeing them for the first time?
Yeah, so the first, this is an interesting story. So the first time I saw them was when I was in flight school in Pensacola, and normally I was up at Whiting Field, which was nearby, in primary flight training. And my instructor at that time was a real screamer. I mean, it was amazing. He was a nice enough guy on the ground, but as soon as we'd get airborne and the landing gear would come up, he would just start yelling at me. And of course, I didn't know any better, so I figured it was me. And so at one point, I'm thinking, I don't know whether this is really for me or not. And it just so happened that year, the air show at Pensacola Beach, for whatever reason, was canceled, and the team decided to fly an air show at Whiting Field, where we were. Lots of flight students were there. And so I watched them fly that day, and I said, okay, I'm not going to quit. If I don't measure up, they can throw me out, of course, but I'm not going to quit. And so that was my first time seeing the team fly and the impact they had on me.
And then years later, you applied to the team. Did you apply ever as a wingman, or just to be boss?
Yeah, so I applied as a wingman, and I was coming out of my first squadron, and I applied to the team. I really hadn't thought about it much, but as I was having conversations with my commanding officer about what he would recommend for me as my next duty assignment, he said, you ought to think about the Blue Angels. And that was really the first time I had ever considered it. And I thought, wow, well, if he thinks that I'd be good at that, then maybe I ought to think about it. So I applied, and I made it to the finals, but I didn't get selected. And it's sort of like the old Chinese proverb, good news, bad news. It's too early to tell, because at the time, of course, I was very disappointed. But later on, I got a chance to lead the team. So it all worked out great.
It worked out, yeah. It sounds like everyone has like the they got rejected the first time story.
Yeah, it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Right.
So when did you find out you were selected, and what did that feel like when you heard the news?
Right. So in order to lead the team, you have to have commanded a fleet squadron. So I was commanding an F-18 squadron, VFA 37, on the East Coast. And the timing just worked out that at the time of my change of command put me in the window where at the same time that the Blues were looking for the next CO and flight leader. And so I applied and was fortunate enough to get invited with 7 or 8 other really great commanding officers to compete. And so we met up in Pensacola for a day of interviews and so forth. And then the selection board, the good part is that the selection board decides right then and there who's going to be the next leader. And then the rest can, get back to wherever else they had in mind to do, which is really helpful. You don't get strung out wondering for a period of days or weeks. Anyway, I just, I looked around the room and I said, geez, there's just no way here. But, you just give it your best shot. And so I was pleasantly shocked whenever the Admiral announced that I would be the leader for the next year. And that was a life-changing event.
Yeah, I bet. You go out of your way in the book to stress, like, everyone on the team is just normal people at the end of the day. And maybe I'm just speaking from my own normal person experience, but I would probably have some sort of a little bit of anxiety and sort of the weight of responsibility all of a sudden. Was there anything like that you felt as soon as, you heard your name called?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly you are representing the hundreds of thousands of men and women on active duty out there on the front lines day in and day out. And you want to make sure that you represent them well and that they feel pride in the fact that you're telling their story to the American public. So you really want to make sure that you don't let them down. So there's a lot of responsibility there. And then specifically in terms of flying, I realized very quickly that I, as the leader, I could have a good day and the team might have an average day, but the team would never have a great day, of course, unless I, as the leader, had a great day, because it was my job to fly as consistently and smoothly as possible throughout all the maneuvers so that the wingmen could join up and get as close as humanly possible and show the world what extraordinary pilots they were. So
you were continuing your organizing streak. You're the organizer.
that's right.
It's in the title of the book, Trust. This is the key to everything.
Yep.
And for those of you watching at home, obviously we're not gonna, go. You should read the book. It's a great book. But I would love if you could just take us through the 5 key principles that you outlined. I mean, it's on the website. It's not
Right.
spoiling anything, but just so we have a framework for our discussion here.
Absolutely. So after I left active duty and I would meet folks and they would find out some of my background, I was getting invited to speak to various organizations and so forth. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was giving them 26 years of leadership lessons in an hour or so, and they enjoyed the stories and the videos and the pictures, but I really felt like it was a mile wide and an inch deep. And so I thought, I need to sort of figure this out. If I could share with them one big idea, one thing that made all the difference for our success. And I focused on this idea of how do you go about developing and sustaining a culture of unconditional trust? Because that was really the essence of our success, whether it was at Topgun or the Blue Angels or in a fighter squadron in combat. That was really the key. And as I focused on it, I thought about that when I was on the team, I never forgot for one day, my 2 years when I was flying a Blue Jet, the tragedy that befell our Air Force brethren, the Thunderbirds, when tragically in January of 1982, they were doing a formation loop in training. And when you're flying that close together, the wingmen aren't looking around enjoying the scenery. They are totally focused on this hot piece of metal that's right next to them as they are flying as close as they can during the maneuver. And sadly, on this day, the leader didn't pull out in time to make the bottom of the loop, and they put 4 T-38s into the desert floor north of Las Vegas, killing all 4 pilots. Tragic. But the reality is that for me to be successful as the Blue Angel flight leader, I had to earn the unconditional trust of my wingmen to the point that they would have to enthusiastically come to work every day and literally put their lives in my hands and mine and theirs as well. And so I thought about what did it take for us to earn that level of trust. And I frankly didn't figure it all out ahead of time, but we had 2 really amazing years flying great air shows safely all across the country. And as I look back on that, I realized there were 5 things that I had to pay attention to. And if you have to pay attention to all 5, if I missed one or neglected one, there would be an issue of some sort that we would have to work our way through. But the good news is if you pay attention to one, it reinforces the other 4 so that you end up with this really powerful sense of teamwork that continues to increase in trust and confidence. So very quickly, here they are, and there's a question associated with each one of these. And depending upon how my teammates, the answer they discern to these questions, they would make a judgment to what degree they are going to trust me. I believe these are the same 5 questions that your listeners are being asked about every single day among the people that are they're in important relationships with. And so here they are. The first one related to character. And the question my team was asking, consciously or unconsciously, was, do you walk your talk? Do you live up to your responsibilities and commitments? Do you live our shared core values of honor, courage, and commitment? In the Blues, we didn't, we had rules, of course, but what really made us special was that we had standards that we tried to live up to. And every day they were asking themselves, is our leader trying to live up to those standards by example? The second one is commitment. My team was absolutely confident that I was going to show up and lead them with a smile on my face when the sky was blue and the sun was out and the air was smooth. But they knew that during the season, we were going to go through some storms, both literally and figuratively. And what they wanted to know was, are you going to show up when we have to take a punch? And not only are you going to show up, but are you going to be the best leader you can be in order to get us through the storm to victory on the other side? The next one is competence. And this is what most people think about whenever they're making a trust decision, particularly at work for a hiring decision or promotion or recognition. The question, they want, how good are you at what you do? And that's really important, absolutely. But I put it third for a reason, because we believe that if you don't get the first 2, the third one doesn't really matter. But if you can get the first 2, if somebody is walking their talk in our shared values in their behavior, and they are all in, as long as you have a good amount of talent and skill, we can teach you whatever you need to know in order to perform at the level we need you to. The next one, I think, is what most leaders are missing these days, because we are all traveling at Mach 2, and we have these to-do lists that are a mile long, right? And the fourth criteria was connection. And the question was, do they believe you understand them? By they being the members of your team or the members of your company or whatever, right? Do they believe you understand them? Which is a different question than do I believe I understand them? Because what I believe is interesting, but not sufficient. What matters is, what do they believe? And when they believe that you get them, that you understand their concerns, their challenges, what you're asking them to do, then they will join up and fly with you no matter what. But if they feel for a minute that you don't get them, then there's always hesitancy, separation, and disengagement. But by the middle of the season, our team would get so connected that I could literally change the trajectory of a maneuver by the inflection of my voice on the radios. Not the words I said on the radios, but how I said the words. If I needed to speed the roll to keep us underneath some clouds, I could do that. If I needed to pull harder at the bottom of a loop to miss a ridgeline or a bridge, I could do that. If I needed to tighten the formation's turn around and pull some G's around the skyscraper, I could do that, because I had invested in my relationships with my wingmen, that they knew that before I made a decision, I was taking them into account and understood what I was asking them to do. The final one is communication. And if connection is about, do they believe I understand them, then communication is, do they understand me? And that's really a problem sometimes for leaders, where they have the presumption that the communication has occurred. And I'm here to tell you that you need to transmit clearly, concisely, consistently, and directly in order to cut through all the noise and stuff that's going on in the environment, to make sure that the messages that you actually transmitted are the ones that are being received. And so those are the five that I paid attention to.
You didn't have these solidified at the time, right? This is something that was retroactive, that you were looking back on.
Yeah, I mean, I had them in my mind because all along the way, you pick them up throughout your career and so forth, and understand what are the characteristics of an effective leader. But I never really labeled them or thought about them as a specific framework until afterwards, and I reflected back on the experience.
Is that something that the current team has embraced at all? Have you shared it with them?
I haven't shared it directly with the current team per se. I have shared them with other former leaders and my teammates and everybody, and it resonates certainly with all of them. I mean, it's really something that we all sometimes take for granted, as we don't speak about it explicitly, but it's very much there. I mean, can I trust you?
So you describe in the book the varying levels of trust from 1.0 to 3.0, and 3.0 is where the Blue Angels end up. And you describe it as a covenant between people. And I love that word. The language is almost like biblical in what you're saying in the book. And I think to like the footage that I've seen of briefs and debriefs where there's, people are chair flying and they've got their eyes closed, and it almost seems like prayer. I'm wondering if you've ever thought of it in like spiritual terms, like that trust between people.
Yeah, I don't think you're too far off in thinking about it as a spiritual, very, very special experience. I don't know about thinking about it in religious terms per se, but in terms of, I mean, having that kind of connection with a group of people that you are on this journey together and you are trying to do something really special and you're working really hard. And I tell you, in that environment, the level of honesty and candor is just off the page, because you absolutely have to have that in order to develop the level of trust that's necessary. Now, when I'm speaking to organizations and leaders and so forth, sometimes people will say, well, yeah, that's really cool, but you were in a life and death environment, right? And that's not what the environment that I'm in, right? So, how relevant is this to me? And I think it's very relevant, because it's in these very extreme experiences that we uncover universal principles, because we can't compromise. We can't look away from it. And that's sort of the theme of the book. I mean, we're ordinary people, but we're in an environment where we have to step up because it's necessary, right? And so I believe that if the readers and your listeners will take some of these universal lessons and apply them in their daily life, they're going to see tremendous success. Now, they don't have to get all the way over to the far right of the trust continuum like we absolutely had to, or it was going to be at best mission failure, and at worst it was going to be a fireball. But if they could raise the level of trust among their teams and in relationships they have, even 20%, I think it would make a profound difference, because frankly, I have never seen such low levels of trust in all dimensions of life in my lifetime as we have right now. So anybody that takes this on will really have an opportunity, I believe, to break out, because there are few people out there that are thinking about how to develop trust as a proactive way in order to achieve success, both individually and collectively as an organization.
Let's pull on that thread a little bit. I had that a little bit later, but we can bump it up here.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, because you did touch a little bit in the book about the societal trust that you say is lacking these days. And I definitely feel it too. Trust in each other, trust in institutions. It's kind of at an all-time low right now. Yeah. Why do you, I know it's kind of a big question, but why do you think that is? First of all, and then what can we do like specifically to address it in your mind?
Yeah, wow, that is a big question.
That's why I had it later, but perfect segue.
Yeah, well, I think the answer fundamentally is in these 5 things, whether we think about them as individuals. I mean, as we're looking here in the election, thinking about to what degree, which candidate can we trust, and looking through the prism of those 5 things. Do they walk their talk? Are they all in, and are they committed to the team, right, as opposed to themselves? Are they competent? Can they do the job? Do I believe they understand me and my challenges and the challenges of the country? And can I understand them when they communicate? So I think it's all in there somewhere. Now, how did we get here? Is a bit of a complicated question, but I think fundamentally we're now in a situation where there's very little truth that we can all agree upon, right? And when you can't all agree on what is truth, then you can't really have the conversations and the debate, if you will, in order to come up with shared solutions that we can agree upon and move forward. I think there's also a bit of, for lack of a better term, some tribalism here, right? Where people are breaking into groups, and the way that media now has become so divided. Back in the day when I was growing up, we had 3 news channels and they all pretty much transmitted the same messages. But now you have an unlimited number of channels out there, both online and cable and offline and so forth. And so people are finding themselves gravitating towards those channels that provide them with almost reassurance of whatever their worldview is, right? And so we end up with these echo chambers, and people now no longer really are talking to each other. They're shouting at each other, and a lot of them are seeing the other people. There's a lack of respect out there, not seeing them as fellow Americans, that we have more in common than we have differences, but rather it's us versus them. And here we are.
It's almost like speaking different languages.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a little heavy, but it's good to get your perspective, because I think, a lot of the stuff that you have in here, like you said, definitely applies. I mean, I think that's one of the strengths of the book, I think, is, not everyone is necessarily going to be a Blue Angel or even going to build a high performance team. But I feel like within here, you've built kind of a way to live your everyday life that's like how to be a good person, which is very inspiring. And I was wondering, like, if you, I mean, you don't have to get too personal, but like, are there things that you've employed from the principles in this book, like in your personal life, or you've seen others employ that have helped in those situations?
Yeah, well, I think, life is all about relationships, whether it's family, friends, community, work. It's all about relationships. And trust is the water that all relationships swim in. And whenever the trust is high and the water is clear, it's just the relationship is strong. It's a wonderful experience. But when the trust is low and the water's dark, everything slows down, everything becomes hard. People feel they're just defensive. And as we just talked about, I mean, that's where we are now in many ways, right? So I think that, and I don't think about these as, okay, I want to apply, but I do try to think of them in the back of my mind as, what kind of a person do I want to be? And I want to be somebody that, my daughters trust, and that they come to me with concerns and issues and advice, and we can have a wonderful, fun, deep relationship. And so I just try to think about, how am I doing in terms of being the kind of person that I want to be?
Let's take it back to the Blue Angels for a sec.
Okay.
I want to talk about the way that the team handles turnover, and I think it's 50% of the officers every year leave and are replaced, and 33% of enlisted.
That's right.
If you're not steeped in how the team does things, it might seem kind of counterintuitive. You would want to keep all your institutional knowledge and, have people who are really good at being Blue Angels. It seems like on the surface that would make sense, but that turnover is like critical to how the team continues to build trust year after year. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how those two things play together.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple reasons why the team has that kind of turnover as you described. I mean, 50% in the jet formation. So when you see the team fly, realize 3 of the 6 are in their first year and 3 of their 6 are in their second year. And in addition to that, only 2 of the pilots fly the same position both years. So number 3, who's on the left wing of the leader, is in his first year, and in the second year, he or she will move to the number 4 position, the slot. Number 6 is the first year in the formation as the opposing solo, and the second year, he or she will move to number 5 and the delta formation on the left wing and be the lead solo. The only 2 that fly the same position both years is number 1 and number 2, and they arrive at the team in opposite years. So number 2 is responsible for training a new leader when he or she comes in, right? And likewise, when the leader's in his or her second year, number 2 is in the first year, learning how to do it. So by moving around like that, 5 of the 6 every year are learning a new position. And it brings a sense of humility to the process that I think is very helpful. The show doesn't change much, but we're all learning how to be really good flying this particular position and we're making mistakes and we're trying hard and we're learning and we're improving every single day. So that's critical important. Now, the other reason we do it is because the folks that come to the team, whether they're enlisted or whether they're the officers, they need to get back to the fleet where they belong to continue to serve and grow and progress in their careers. So we couldn't afford to have them come in and spend 4, 5, 6 years on the team, which frankly, after a couple years, there's a concern that sometimes maybe some complacency might set in. You might start to feel like you've got this all figured out. And then that would potentially, mitigate some of our risk control that we have. So you never ever climb into the jet and have the canopy come down and think, okay, I got this figured out. There's a little bit of edge there. So yeah. It's good.
Maybe on the homecoming show here. That's the one.
That's the only one we don't debrief, by the way. Yeah. Every other practice flight and air show, we will spend however long it takes to dissect it in amazing detail in order to find out what happened, why did it happen, and what can we do better tomorrow. Except for the very last show at the end of the season, because that team is now not going to fly together again. Some of them will be part of the next year's team, but that's a new team. A season is a lifetime, we like to say.
Speaking of lifetimes, you mentioned in the book, and you mentioned it earlier, that as Blue Angels, you are representing the Navy and Marine Corps 24/7, 365, and that's a big responsibility that you have. Do you feel like that continues even after you leave the team officially, once you become an alumni? I feel like everyone who I've talked to who has left the team still feels like they are representing that.
Yeah, in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Being a Blue Angel sort of becomes a parenthetical part of your identity, right? And you take it that very seriously, and so you want to make sure that you continue to represent the Navy and Marine Corps and all the wonderful people that are out there serving. So yeah.
You mentioned in the book that leaders are very often good at the how and the what, but not the why. And I wanted to hear from your perspective, what is the why of the Blue Angels?
Yeah. So as a little background, though, for for that second C, if you will, in the framework for commitment, that's where I believe commitment really comes from, right? What is it that allows somebody to persevere through adversity and continue to get up every day and get after it in order to accomplish something significant? And I believe that comes from a very deep, a very clear, a very intense sense of purpose. In the military, we call it mission. When you know what mission you're on and why it is very, very important, that's what gives you a level of commitment that is unstoppable. Now, the mission for the Blue Angels, the reason the team was created, was coming out of World War II. We had this whole new way of warfighting, which is airplanes taken off of aircraft carriers, going over the horizon and projecting power against the enemy far beyond what we were able to prior to that with battleships shooting naval guns, right? And so after every war, there's always a drawdown, and then the real battle begins inside the government, particularly inside the Pentagon, as the services now compete for scarce resources in the post-war drawdown. So Admiral Nimitz, who was head of the Navy at the time, wanted to make sure that this whole new thing of naval aviation got shown to the American public so they could see that the Navy flies airplanes, which, by the way, some people I meet still don't get it. But so we got more work to do. But the idea was to go out and show the American public the pride and precision of naval aviation, and, as I mentioned earlier, inspire young people to see an example of excellence that hopefully they will aspire to, and hopefully look at that and go, hey, I want to be a part of something like that. And they'll consider signing up and serving for some period of time in the military. So that's our mission. And for us, it was pretty easy because we'd see it in the eyes of the people that we met at the show, the young people. And we had an opportunity to be able to reach out and touch somebody and hopefully inspire them, put a story in their heart that they would then lead to some really good things afterward.
Yeah. I've always thought that it even goes beyond the recruitment piece too. It's been said by the team of that inspiring excellence in whatever you do, regardless of whether it's joining the military. I mean, that would be nice. That's the main part of the reason. But just generally inspiring people to be better, I think.
Yeah, it's been, as I travel around the country and I speak to various corporations and organizations of all sizes, I'm always just really touched by the fact that the American public seems to have this personal connection with the Blue Angels and what they represent, and it's really something to see, and hopefully, that's something that we can do to have an impact on inspiring people to. And the problem, though, is that when people go to watch an air show, right, frankly, they make it look too easy. I mean, they don't really get the sense of all that's gone on ahead of time and all the hard work throughout the whole squadron. I mean, there's 125 Blue Angels. Most of them are these amazing maintenance technicians and support personnel that are necessary, and how hard they work and dedicated. I mean, we're all Blue Angels. And people don't get a chance to see all that. But that's part of the story too, an important part.
That's a big reason why I like talking to folks like yourself and other former Blue Angels, to give that inside look, because it's just, and people have no idea.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So you say it multiple times throughout the book that the work is never done. Is that ever like demoralizing to you? to like, oh, I can accomplish a lot, but it's never done,
Yeah, well, that's sort of one of the things that I've learned along the way, is that, it doesn't get easier when you get better. I mean, the effort and the focus and the attention you have to continue to bring that every day. But every now and then you gotta take time to reflect on and glance back and see how far you've come. And when you do that, then you have this sense, okay, I'm making progress. I'm getting where I want to get to, and that hopefully then will counterbalance the need for every day to show up and, bring your A game.
There was a great line that you had in the book as well, that success breeds forgetfulness about what it took to achieve it. And that is so true. I've seen it throughout many different places in life. But I wanted to get your take on why you think the Blue Angels for the past 3/4 of a century have mostly avoided that trap.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is because there is that amount of turnover. And so there's a lot of refreshment, and oftentimes people are surprised when I tell them that, hey, I didn't come in as a wingman and then fleet up and later become the leader. I came in as the commanding officer and the leader, which poses some challenges. But by the same token, you don't have a situation where the organization stagnates, or you have a leader come in who had flown as a wingman, several years prior, and decides that, hey, when I was here before, we did it differently, and I want to go back to doing it that way. No, no, no. We want the organization to continue to move forward. And whenever you have people who are only there for a relatively short amount of time, there's a lot of enthusiasm and freshness to, okay, what do we have to do here, and how do we move this organization forward? So I think that's how we combat that idea of where you become this great success, and now you spend a lot of your time just sort of protecting that, right? That position, right?
It was really cool. Towards the end of the book, you turned it over to your wingmen, and they had each one of them had their own little chapter. That was so cool to see. What was the thinking of having that?
I've been thinking about writing this book for a long time, and I've had some resistance to it because I didn't want the book to be about me. I wanted it to be about us and our shared experience. And of course, it's written a lot through my eyes and the experiences that I had, but I wanted to make sure that they shared in it, and that when my teammates saw the product, that they would feel good about it, that it accurately referenced their experience, right? And so I thought, I want to give them a chance to share. First of all, because I didn't fly their positions, right? And so I wanted them to share what it was like to be on the left wing as your first year on the team, or fly in the slot position, or be one of the solos, and so forth. So I asked them to jot down their thoughts, and I was really pleased that they did.
We've been jumping around a little bit because this was supposed to come after the earlier question about the societal trust, but I wanted to get your take on. I get the sense that, especially in my generation, there's a lot of pessimism in people, and the Blue Angels to me have always sort of represented an antidote, so to speak, for pessimism. They represent optimism, and I wanted to get your take on how you speak to particularly younger people about the importance of optimism.
Yeah. So in the book, I have a section there where I talk about the Stockdale paradox, which is referenced in Jim Collins' wonderful book, Good to Great. And the story is about Admiral Stockdale, who was a Medal of Honor winner as the senior POW in Vietnam. And here's a guy spent years in solitary confinement, but came up with ways to communicate to the other prisoners as he set up a structure and organization, if you will, among the prisoners. And his goal was to get as many of the POWs home safely as possible, right? And so he's asked, what was the secret to your success? And he talks about this concept of realistic optimism, right? That you can never, ever lose your faith that tomorrow's going to be a better day, that we are going to accomplish the mission that we're on, that we're going to get there. But at the same time, you have to never shy away from recognizing whatever reality that you're in, however brutal. You can't kid yourself, because only by recognizing the truth of your situation can you really take effective action to move forward, either personally or collectively, right? And so that is my message when I talk to folks. If I get it that we have lots of problems, and frankly, we're depending upon the younger generation to solve particularly those things that my generation did not do well on. But America is an amazing country, and when we look around and see how other folks from all over the world look to us as an example, that we have the ability to do amazing things whenever we come together and put our minds to it. And so we have to not only realize the toughness that we have going on right now with lots of a variety of issues, but also remember, what our potential is to get where we want to and solve those problems.
I would love to ask you some random technical questions now.
Oh,
if you're
good.
okay with it.
Something lighter.
A little bit lighter material. And the first one is something that I probably should know by now, but might as well ask you, why are all the rolls in the demonstration done to the left?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of people don't realize that. But yes, all the rolling maneuvers are always to the left. And some of that is, frankly, just, I believe, it makes life simpler when you're always going left, right? So, because for the wingman, it's not necessarily a natural act to do it. Nobody else does it rolling maneuvers as the Blues do and the Thunderbirds do. So imagine the number 2 on the right wing and number 6 in the Delta formation on the right side. They're pulling and rolling as we're going around, positive G, rolling. And on the left side, number 3 and number 5, they're pushing and rolling, which is uncomfortable, which is why I believe that people ask me, okay, what's the toughest position in the demo? And of course, I have to say, well, of course, the lead is, right? But number 3, I think, because he's a he or she's first-year pilot on the team, and also the left wing having to push and roll in those maneuvers. And then when the diamond shifts into echelon and you have the aircraft stacked out, number 3 is sandwiched between number 2 and number 4 and really has no place to go and has to just hang in there. Very, very tough. Now my number 2 wingmen, Pat Cook and Scott Wedemeyer, would want me to make sure I mention here that number 2 is the only one that rolls on both sides of the formation. So they're rolling on the right side in diamond, and then when we go to echelon, they're rolling on the left side. So, and that's probably I hadn't thought about this necessarily before, but the number 2 pilot flying that same position both years is a good thing, because it's tough to learn how to do it in both directions.
Yeah, and both those number 2 guys, were they both Marines?
Yes.
Is there a reason that the Marines tend to end up, I feel like they were hanging out in the 2 spot for a long time?
Traditionally for many years, the Marine was the right wingman. Yeah. But then along the way, the teams made a decision that, because the idea is that you apply to be a Blue Angel first. You don't apply to be a solo pilot or a diamond pilot or whatever. You apply to be a Blue Angel. And then after the new members of the team are selected for the next year, and then they join the team a couple months prior, around September or so, and they travel with the team and get to see behind the curtain how things are done. That's when the team will make a decision on where each one is going to fly. And at some point there, they decided to put the Marine as a narrator, number 7, and then become number 6 and number 5. And now, who knows where they're going to show up.
I was wondering if it was because they trained the boss, if they needed the drill sergeant.
Well, yeah, if you talk to Pat Cook, he certainly filled that role.
You mentioned in the book also that incorporated the diamond landing,
Yeah,
which is super cool. They did it in the A4 as the whole delta, but the F-18 is too big to do all six, right? So first of all, like, what was that like? And second of all, why don't they do it anymore?
right. So the team did formation landings back as early as the F-11s, and then the F-4, and then the A-4. The reason we took it out of the show when the F-18 came along was, number one, early in its development, the F-18 was having some landing gear problems. The wheels on the F-18 actually, whenever you raise the landing gear handle, the wheels actually rotate in and then come up into the airplane like this. And they were having problems with the connecting rods actually bending during this because of the wheel spinning, and the gyro effect was actually causing these things to break. Now, they came up with engineering fixes for that later, but initially there were problems with that. So the team thought it was undue risk to have the F-18s land in formation. The other problem with the F-18 difference between the F-18 and the A4, F4, and F-11 was that the F-18 doesn't have a drag chute. And so in the other airplanes, when they landed in formation, if somebody blew a tire or had an issue, they could pop the parachutes, the drag chutes out and get out of the formation and get away. Well, the Hornet, you couldn't do that. So it was decided when transitioned, the 1987 team decided that they weren't going to do the formation landing, and it sort of stayed that way until it finally, when it came to our team in the late 90s, some of us had grown up watching Blue Angel air shows and just thought that what a powerful message it was for four jets to take off and fly around together and then land together. That's extreme teamwork, right? And so we contacted Naval Air Systems Command and asked them for a risk analysis on the landing gear. Was that still a problem that would not make sense for us to do it? And they said no. The statistics showed that there wasn't any great risk in that. And so then we thought about, okay, can we do this and still be able to preserve acceptable safety margin? So we went out and practiced and came up with procedures such that if somebody had a problem when we landed, we could, and we practiced it every week, early in the week on Tuesday or Wednesday when we were flying practice demonstrations in Pensacola. We would always end the show with, when we landed in Diamond, we would simulate that one of us had a landing gear problem or something like that. And then we would either all go around and or one of us would bail out or whatever. And so thankfully it never happened, but we were ready for it when it did. And so it was really great to be able to put that back in the show. Subsequent teams have decided not to do it I'm sure for great reasons, but our team takes great pride in the fact that we were the only ones that did it in the Hornet.
What was your favorite maneuver?
Whoa, they're all great. The one that I think was the most fun, if you will, because they all involve tremendous concentration all the time, but the maneuver we call the double farvel, which I don't know where that name came from. I think it was a character in a commercial way back when they invented the maneuver. But initially it was a farvel, was only the leader, the diamond formation with the leader upside down. And then later it became the double farvel when one of the teams, and I don't know which one, they had the leader and the slot pilot would flop upside down. And that's what they do today. And that's what our team did was the double farvel. So it was fun to be flying upside down in formation at very low altitude, going back past the crowd and then breaking out of that formation. I always say I also really loved what we called the diamond dirty loop. And it's referred to as the dirty loop because in aviation, whenever you have the landing gear down and so forth, it's considered somewhere along the line, it came up as the dirty configuration, right? So that's hence the name, the diamond dirty loop. But What it is the diamond with the landing gear down and the tail hooks down do a loop together with all this extreme drag on the airplane. I mean, it demonstrates the incredible power of these General Electric engines that the F-18 has. And I love to say that that was one of my favorite maneuvers because the Air Force Thunderbirds can't do it, right? Because being Navy aircraft with really strong landing gear, so that because when you land on the aircraft carrier, you don't flare and touch down. No, you come in at 600 feet per minute all the way to the wheels touch down and the tail hook catches the wire. So we're really the only demonstration team in the world that can do a dirty loop just because of the landing gear.
I want to talk a little bit about Fat Albert.
Yeah, please.
I'm actually doing a separate Fat Albert related project, documentary style project, and I've been talking to a lot of former present and former pilots and maintenance people and stuff like that.
Great.
And the work that they do is just like incredible.
Yep.
I don't need to tell you that,
Yep.
but I'd love to hear from you, and you can go into more detail, but if at first you could give me like, if you could distill it down to a word or two, how would you describe Bert?
Well, let's put aside a little bit the Bert demonstration that they do, because that's very cool, and certainly the young people, the youngsters really love seeing Fat Albert fly. But if I had to put it down to one word of what Fat Albert and the crew, the people that maintain it and fly it, mean to the Blue Angels, would be essential. Absolutely essential. We could not have done what we did and how we did it without having a dedicated transport aircraft that was part of the organization, that lived our values and who we were. And those guys and gals just do magic. And every Blue Angel you talk to will tell you a story about how many times Fat Albert saved the show because we had a logistics issue. Maybe an engine got damaged by taking a bird or something like that, and we needed to, swap out an engine, and Bert would fly to wherever the nearest military base was that had a General Electric engine, and they would get it loaded up, and they would come back oftentimes in the middle of the night, and then the technicians would just swarm on the airplane and literally change those engines out in a matter of several hours and have the airplanes ready to go for the next show. It was just remarkable. So they are the unsung heroes of the team, no question about it.
When we spoke before, you had a little story about when your daughter was born. I was wondering if you could relay that here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was so. It was my second year, and my wife somehow got pregnant, and must have,
somehow
on a Monday when I was home, right? Because we're not home all that much, But anyway, so she was pregnant and was due to be, the baby was due in April of my second year, right? And so being the type A character, I'm figuring, okay, based on the schedule, we'll come out of winter training. We fly our first show in Tucson. We get home, I think we fly another show, and then we take Easter weekend off, which is when the baby was due. And I thought, okay, we'll have the baby then, and then I'll get back, we'll get on for the next show. Well, we're getting ready to leave El Centro for our first show in Tucson, and my wife calls me and says, okay, the water just broke, I'm going in, and so forth. I thought, oh, what are you doing? That's not what we planned. So anyway, make a long story a little shorter. We go over to Tucson, we get our checkpoints, we practice, and then we're in the debrief. And before the debrief, I call and I find out if I'm a dad yet. And I find out that no, I'm still in labor. And so I say, okay, well, I'll call whenever I get to the hotel, and have somebody call me whenever I'm a dad. And I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, I hung up and I got 16 eyeballs looking at me, or 16 pairs of eyeballs looking at me from all the officers in the debrief room. And they said, "What are you doing? You can't stay here. You got to go." And so Scott Wedemeyer, Blue Angel number 2, filed a flight plan for me. And the maintenance officer, Neil Austin, went and had the airplane fueled and ready to go. And so I went out and jumped in the number 1 jet and rocketed back from Arizona back to Florida, to Pensacola, our home. And amazingly enough, the fog had moved in and the weather being reported was like a 1/4 mile visibility, way below instrument minimums for me to come in. But as I came over Mobile, Alabama, I looked down, I could see through the clouds and I could see the airport in Mobile. So when the approach personnel at Pensacola, and by the way, the field was about to close, they were keeping it open for me to get there. And they radioed me and said, "Okay, the weather's a 1/4 mile in fog. What are your intentions?" And I said, "Well, unless you've rolled up the concrete, I'm coming down to take a look and we'll see." And sure enough, I get down there and, the fog had been blown away and fine. I got the runway just fine and landed. And then one of the squadron wives, Rob Wunderlich's wife, met me at the airplane and jumped in her car and she drove me to the hospital. And I got there, I don't know, about 1 a.m. and the baby was born at 2. So that was remarkable. So I got to be there for that magical moment. Went home, got a couple hours sleep, came back, said goodbye to mother and daughter, jumped in the jet and rocketed back to Tucson for the Friday practice that we were going to do. So that was quite a memorable thing. And the interesting thing was that one of the Blue Angel traditions is that on Fridays, the team will meet with Make-A-Wish children in the area and their families. And that is really a powerful thing. So inspiring to meet those children and their parents and see what they are dealing with great humor and great resilience. And so suddenly, with me having a healthy baby girl back home, that just was so important to me to spend time with them.
Well, I've come to sort of the end of what I had outlined, but before we wrapped up, I wanted to just ask you if there's anything that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to make sure you got out there.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's the key thing as I already mentioned in the Blue Angels mission, is that, they're not doing loops and rolls and so forth for their own self-interest. They're doing it as a way to represent their brothers and sisters and their families that are out there serving every day under some real tough conditions in order to defend the Constitution against all enemies and make sure that our allies know that, we're there to support them. And so I think the big takeaway I would like people to take from, as they either watch the Blue Angels documentary or come to an air show or whatever, is just to see that it's so much more than just the 6 pilots. It's a team of 125, and the young men and women that are the maintenance technicians and so forth, they're the real heart and soul of the Blue Angels. We used to say that the jets really belong to them. We were just lucky enough to borrow them for 40 minutes at a time every day in order to fly.
Well, the book is High Trust Leadership, Building High Performance Teams. And it's out now.
Yep.
It's fantastic. You should read it. George Dom, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Evan. Great to see you again after all these years.
After all these years. Let's not make it another 27 years. How about
Of course
that?
not.
Well, glad to be here.
Me too. Thanks.